Hey, it's News from Heaven, and today we're talking about 4 things that God cannot do. And one thing that you may notice is that the salt lamp is not on. And there's actually a funny story as to why the salt lamp is not on. Do you want to hear it? Okay, I promise what we're going to get into is the 4 things God cannot do. Now, these are not the only 4 things God cannot do. I just found 4 things right in a little batch here where it says God can't do it. And you've got to have that. You've got to have that notion of some kind of limitations on God, because that's the way the problem of evil resolves itself. And Swedenborg does seem to say, look, sure, God has all the power, but there are things that God cannot do. What are they? You're going to learn 4 of them today. How could you not want to learn that? Now, for those of you who want to learn about the salt lamp, why it's not on, is it because the bulb is broken or something? No, it's because we had here what's it called? Derecho? I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's a straight line windstorm that is as fast as a tornado. And it just knocked out the power for everyone. Everything you see here is actually running on a generator that we got set up outside. There wasn't quite enough outlets or reach to get the salt lamp. We had a huge tree in our front yard go down. Luckily, nobody was hurt. It did hit the neighbor's car a little bit. They've been super nice about it. We're going to, of course, get that fixed out, make sure that they get everything they need. But there was a lot of widespread damage around. It just got me thinking of like, wow, life is beautiful. I don't know why you get like that when things happen, but I talked to a neighbor of mine who she had her house hit a lot worse, but she was just so clear about what matters and what doesn't. So that was inspiring. They came on the news and talked to me about it because the tree was so big, and anyway, that's the story. You didn't come here for that. You came here for 4 things God cannot do. Currently, he cannot restore light to this salt lamp. It's just not the way it works. All right, so what we're going to do here is find that even the idea of a limitation on God should actually increase our overall joy of life, our feeling of life is beautiful. Because if that's what it really is, if when you know all the ins and outs of the truth, there's these 2 pictures that are painted for us. One by negativity and falsity, and the other by goodness and truth. Like what really is good. It's when we don't understand or we're not seeing things from the big picture that we don't think it's good. So what's the goodness we're going to find? This is in the book True Christianity, number 364. It's a free download. You can go download it on Swedenborg.com, follow along, read any other parts that you feel like tie in. And let's see what we're learning about here. It's good to be with you. Okay. The Lord flows into everyone with all his divine love, all his divine wisdom, and all his divine life, which might just sound like a bunch of gobbledygook. Like, okay, it's all. But wait a second. What that is saying is that we're not, here you go, Curtis, you have some of this divine love and life. Here you go, Marge, you have some. I had to think about what's the perfect name for somebody. You have some of this divine love and light. The Lord flows into everyone with all his divine love, his divine wisdom, divine life. Then how are we different? This is already crazier than any straight line windstorm. In the book of creation, we're talking about the Bible here, and the initial part of it, Genesis. When we read that we were created in the image of God, and that God breathed the breath of life into our nostrils, there's your references, this means we are not life. We are merely organs that receive life. Which right there, I mean, you could have fooled me. It just what seems like more of an obvious part of life than, oh yeah, I have a life. Do you have a life? What? Why do people always tell me I don't have a life? The life that I'm Curtis. Of course I'm alive. I'm a person. But what this is saying is that actually we are vessels or organs that can receive life. And life itself, not just like good fortune in your life or good, nice feelings for other people. Life itself is constantly streaming into us. And it's only that, like electricity, I'm thinking about electricity today, only when electricity is constantly streaming do these things come to life. So it is with us. God could not create another being like himself. That's it. Let's label them as we find them. There we have number 1. What's something God can't do? God could not create another being like himself. God can't make something that is intrinsically life. And is this because, and why? Is it because God says, well, then I wouldn't be the coolest thing around, I would just be one God and there's a bunch of other gods and maybe they don't invite me to whatever, their birthday party. If he could have done so, there would be as many gods as there are people. You talk about somebody who's not clutching on to the reins of power. That if so both have this fascinating, okay, there's a limitation. The infinite cannot create another infinite. Two infinites can't exist. But if he could, oh man, here you go. You can be the infinite. You can be the infinite. There would be as many gods as there are people. So this wish to give somebody everything that that one has, is the essence of God. And God would extend that. It's not just like, well, I've made you people, but I'm going to be the God, and you'll all be the people. This is the best that can be done. God could not create life or light either. Let there be light. God could not create. So you could say that's two of them, but we'll just say this is number two. I think this will line up with our title, right? Curtis could not create a functional two. God could not create life or light either. God could, however, create people as forms that receive life, just as he created the eye as a form that receives light. So I'm starting to get this. Create people as forms that receive life. So life is an intrinsic quality of God. Like God is life, and God can't create another life. But he can say, look, I can create a form. That's what we are. I can create a form that I can stick life into, and somehow when you stick God into the form that we are, you get this amazing thing, which is independent seeming consciousness. I don't know what he's talking about with light. Let's see if we find it out. God could not and still cannot divide his own essence. That is an indivisible oneness. Man, we're burning through these, but come on. So you can't divide your essence. That is an indivisible oneness. So if you think about what you just can't hit it with I saw this guy, I know this is way more of my personal life than any of you are looking for, but this giant tree that fell, there was a guy who came out with a chainsaw, tree worker, who was just clearing the road initially to make sure people could drive through. And he was cutting it, this huge white pine, and it got his chainsaw stuck right in there. And so what he had to do is, he wasn't worried, this is something that happens all the time, had to go get this wedge, a big metal wedge, and a sledgehammer, and just bong, 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 smack that thing in to divide that huge heavy tree. It was amazing. It divided it enough that he could get, that chainsaw out. But you think if that tree was heavier, he couldn't have done it, And then if you could get like tree that's made out of, I want to say adamantium, isn't that like from X-Men, the metal that can't be broken? Whatever the heaviest thing is in the universe, could it get to a point where you're almost like, well, you just can't divide this. So God's infinity, his own essence, is indivisible. You can't find a hammer and a wedge strong enough to divide that. So that's why can God make a rock so heavy you can't lift it? I don't know, but he can have an essence so indivisible that he can't divide it. Therefore, since God alone is life, it follows without a doubt that God uses his life to bring us all to life. Okay, and this is getting back, do you remember, you got all these numbers here, but what we're talking about here, the really uplifting thing is that all of God's love, wisdom, and life are in you. How so? Therefore, without being brought to life, we would all have flesh that was no more than a sponge and bones that were no more than a skeleton. The physical is not life. We would have no more life than a clock that moves because of its pendulum and a weight or a spring. So there's an appearance of life, right, of motion, but we know there's nobody home in there. Given this fact, it also follows that God flows into every human being with all his divine life, that is, with all his divine love and wisdom. For these two things constituting his divine life, so that divinity is indivisible. Because if we just said God can't split it, remember? You can't whack it hard enough. So it doesn't mean that when we're talking about you and the life you have in you, that God is like, well, here's this kind of lame sort of backwater part of me. I'll put that into you, but the really cool people are getting this part of me. Like all of God's life and love is in you. You can't divide it up. So that's good. That makes me feel good. That's a little something to push back. Maybe these negative clouds, hey, by the way, the life you all are attacking, the peanut gallery that sits around and tries to make us afraid for the outcome of our life, or make it so that we are critical of our own life, or using our life to go out and do petty things and hurt people and all that. To all of you, just notice what you're attacking is all of the infinity of God. It's in there. I'm not saying we can't misuse it. We can't shut it out and put it in the passenger seat rather than driver's seat. But the vital core that keeps you alive, it's all that stuff. So that's uplifting. But what we don't have is, how's that work? Why are we not all the same? I think he's going to talk about that here. Furthermore, we can understand how God flows in with all his divine life, just as we understand that the sun, and here's the light I think he's talking about. The sun in our world flows with all its essence, heat and light, into every tree, every bush, every flower, and even into every stone, both precious and common. Every object draws its own share from the general inflow. The sun does not divide up its heat and light and give part of it to this thing and another part to that one. So I guess what we're talking about is that everything's receiving the same. You couldn't the light that's right here going into, I'm looking out at trees right now. The light that's going into that tree is something different. It's all just the photons. I don't even know what the current state of understanding the emanation from the sun is. It's all just, it's pouring in to everything everywhere. Sure, you could go to parts of the globe and the rays are slanted, but it's the same rays, right? So you can get very different forms of, let's just stick to vegetation, very different forms of vegetation, but yet they're all partaking. The raw energy that's going into all of them are these photons. The same thing is true of the sun in heaven, the source from which divine love emanates in the form of heat and divine wisdom in the form of light. Love and wisdom flow into human minds the way heat and light from the world's sun flow into bodies, bringing them to life depending on the quality of their form. Each form takes what it needs. Here we go. Each form takes what it needs from the general inflow. So you've got your particular hardened mind and who you are and the part of this God's life that you're bringing to life. And the difference is in us as receiving vessels, right? Somehow, the arrangement of the spiritual equivalent to our neurons, or who knows how it actually works, the mechanics of it. But the concept here is that we are given the full spectrum of light. And just like with colors, right? You absorb what you absorb and you reflect out what you don't. And that's why there's this difference in visual appearance. So it is that each of us have full access to this, and our essence is taking what it needs to be us. But it's not, so we have these differences, but it's not like God is saying, you only get access to this. Here's everything. What's the best thing for you? What the Lord says applies here. Your Father makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. So you can even apply it to people who are, as we're saying, misusing life to intentionally cause harm to people. That life is still coming out of God. The ability to live, the actual impulses to those actions are totally corrupted through this long chain of events that Swedenborg describes, where it goes, through different people's hearts and minds. It's a long story. I'm already looking like a fool. I don't need to look more like a fool. But you've probably heard if you've been hanging around these episodes. But it's the same life. And so, makes you think about you trying to walk a mile in somebody's shoes and see how did that's life get to where it is. The Lord is omnipresent. And everywhere he is present with his entire essence. I know you're probably like, where's the fourth one? I think there's a fourth one. We didn't already do it, did we? I don't think so. We'll see if it comes up here. It is. Isn't are you on the edge of your seat? It is impossible for him to take out some of his essence and give part of it to one person and a part to another. Just as I was reading that, did you miss it? Why do I make these margins so big? It is impossible. That's number 4. What's impossible? For him to take out some of his essence and give part of it to one person and another part to another. He gives it all. And I think where this is angels on the head of a pin. It's its theological musings. What I think of when I think of he gives it all, is same thing too, like with the life, sure. But what about with providence? What about with the way that God runs your life? Because I know that the way it feels to me is I can say, well, yeah, I believe that God is sort of taking care of some people, taking care of people in general. But me, he seems to be not really paying attention to me. He seems to be, basically, I'm not important enough for him to really, I'm not high on his to-do list. There's definitely this tendency to think, well, I'm not all the way just as central to everything as everyone else is, right? But I've just was reading these near-death experiences where it was saying that the Lord loves you like there's nobody else in the universe. That God is not dividing his attention to say, okay, yeah, I made a couple people over here that I'm really excited about, and they're like changing the world, or they're really good morally, or whatever it is that is sort of this, oh, these people have it and I don't. And they are like, I'm so excited when I see them. You're all right. I mean, yeah, come here. No, that this is, he gives it all. We are each the center. Somehow, I guess this is what it is to be omni, is that we can each be the absolute uncompromised center of the heart of the Lord. I'm telling you. He also gives us the ability to adopt as much as we wish of it, whether a little or a lot. Oh, so he's not holding us back. And I would say, I wouldn't think about this in like, oh, okay, well then should I play guitar and drums and tuba and everything? It's talking about embracing it is loving the Lord and loving the neighbor. Rejecting it is loving self and loving materialism. And that's a scale where that's where we really play the role. It's not in how remarkable am I as a person. It's how much am I letting the Lord in? How much am I letting the Lord's life be my life? Because you don't have to. You can have your own life, even though it's still the Lord powering it. The decisions and things, the lifestyle can be completely counter to what the Lord wants. You got the option, but you know what? I'm thinking it's a better investment to do the Lord thing. The Lord says he has a home with those who do his commandments, and that the faithful are in him and he is in them. In a word, all things are full of God. Yeah, it's just full of God. We each take our own portion from that fullness. This is true of atmospheres and oceans, also of everything that is universal. The atmosphere is the same on a small and a large scale. It does not limit itself to giving one aspect of itself to someone who is breathing, a second aspect to a bird that is flying, a third aspect to the sails of a ship, a fourth aspect to the vanes of a windmill. Instead, each thing draws on certain aspects of the atmosphere and applies to itself as much as it needs. Okay, and we'll give you this last funny example. It is the same as a barn full of grain. The owners draw from it the provisions they need for a given day. The barn does not determine what they receive. Look, it's here. Hey, go at it. But with this stuff about the air and the way that the air is providing this uplift for a bird. I don't know how they fly, but it's also blowing in the sails of a ship. It's also it's a universal principle. And I think we can see that even more in things like how gravity or whatever we're figuring out is gravity, electromagnetism, however that works, it's everywhere. You have these systems that apply to everything, and that from these relatively few eternal constants, you get all this variety. So that is an image or a reflection of that God is not playing favorites, that God is absolutely giving us, like, I'm going to give everything to you. And as we learned in the beginning, that would include, if it were possible, God would say, here, you be God instead. Go for it. You're going to love it. It's really awesome. There's a lot of responsibility, but I think you're up to it, and here, go for it. I mean, that is the heart of God. So just know that that's the heart that is caring for your life and setting out the trajectory of events, and is the thing you're going to grow and develop to be more and more loved by and given life by forever. It's going to get better and better and better. And that's the news from heaven. What do you think? How do you like those things God can't do? Let us know in the comments. We really appreciate it. Please donate to support us, otle.cosvox.com. That's what makes this stuff possible. And I hope that you guys are full of this. Hey, life is beautiful. Even though there's so much going on in the world right now, all kinds of pain and suffering, I think that there is a life underneath it. and can we feel that life and bring that, just like we all in the world can accept all of God's life or reject a lot of it. Let's accept it. Let's bring that desire to give all of what we have to the common good that is God. Let's bring that into the world. It's going to be great. Thanks for hanging out.